You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
Now streaming on Peacock.
By all that's holy, Bridget Jones.
Hello, old friend.
Bridget Jones is back
We are about to embark on an adventure.
for one final chapter.
Anything else I can help with?
Yes.
Experience every moment
Do you think about what might have been?
and fall in love
To Bridget.
all over again.
It's time to live.
Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. Streaming now only on Peacock.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about the debate and eating pets. Are cats being eaten? It's just so silly. Apologize if I sound a little weird today. I've got, when the seasons change, I just always get a little bit of a sniffle. Nothing too bad right now. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. Get in there, turn the shower on, I turn my bath. I know this is horrible, and I don't write me about mold, I know. But I'm a renter, so I don't care. I get the bathroom nice and steamy and turn it into basically a sauna, and it opened up my airways. It was great. And it's so warm. It's just the best. You should try it if you rent. If you own, then don't do that because you can get mold. But not my problem, right? We are going to talk about the conversation around the debate. My thoughts on the debate. On debate night, I watched the debate from a conference room at Switchboard, where my podcast studio, Circle City Studios, is located, which you can rent, by the way. Go to leadersandlegends.net, and you can put your butt in the same chair that my butt sits in. Like anybody care. But Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party presidential candidate, was in town, and they had a debate watch party downstairs, and then he used my studio with Abdul Hakim Shabazz to counter-program the debate. And then I watched the debate in a conference room and then did an interview with him afterwards, which obviously you heard in the feed. And they originally asked me to do what Abdul did, and I said no. I was difficult. I partially felt that, look, I've tried to fight for some independence from the Libertarian Party. I will vote for a Libertarian candidate this time. I love my Libertarian Party of Indiana friends dearly and will always do what I can to help them out. I don't know that I consider myself in the Libertarian Party anymore. I don't really feel like I have a political home anymore. We'll talk about Chase here in a minute. But so I've tried to fight for that independence. Going live on his social media, I felt looked like a homer move, where Abdul, I think, has much more credibility as an independent voice. And then mainly I just was like, I don't think it's a good, who's going to watch me and Chase versus, I want to watch the debate. So I was wrong. Like 10,000 people watch them and 3,000 people watch Chase and I, but, that's okay. Chase and I had a conversation. I found him. I'm going to be honest with you. I have not followed Chase's campaign. I tend to just follow high-level presidential politics at this point. So I really haven't gotten into the weeds like I used to on the Libertarian Party presidential nominee because I don't work for the party anymore. I'm not active in the party. I don't see him popping up. Like Joe came to town several times and her team seemed to have media present. I know they're putting stuff out, especially on TikTok, but I'm not on TikTok, so I don't really see it. I don't really know a ton about where his campaign's at and what they're doing. I've interviewed him. That's been in the feed. I watched a John Stossel interview with him in preparation, but that was the first thing that I'd seen. And this Raw Audio Politics podcast feed that I've been putting out where I'm polling like big picture clips of just raw audio. Like, here, listen to a Trump speech, listen to a Kamala speech, and you make your decision. I went looking for speeches by Chase, and I could find 2, and that was it. So I don't think there's a ton out there. Their comms team was great to work with. I know they're on the ball, and they're very competent. So I don't think it's a problem in the campaign. I do go back to what Hody said on a recent interview, that there's just not a lot of support. There's not local affiliates generating events for them to speak at. He was here in Indiana. They reached out. They got an interview with Abdul. They got an interview with me. They got another interview with Abdul. I think maybe he was on WIBC. He had an event with a Chamber of Commerce here in town, a couple supporter parties. And I don't know if that's happening in other places. Obviously, with the Mises Caucus taking over, controlling the party apparatus, and then losing at the convention despite having majorities, they've held sour grapes and have blamed Chase for that, which is strange. But my interview with him was really my first exposure to talking to Chase. I don't know if I've ever met him in person before that. I feel like I have, because even when you do an interview on Zoom, like you're talking before, you're talking after, you feel like you've made a connection. And I followed him a lot in Georgia, but I don't know that I've met him in person. I'm not really sure. I was really surprised with how well he answered a lot of stuff. In terms of skill, depth, having an answer for everything, I found his answers to be straightforward. There wasn't a lot of tap dancing around things. He just said, here's my view, here's what we ought to do. I think a lot of libertarian candidates in the past have kind of tried to equivocate to find the best answer to get you to appeal to them. I didn't feel like he did that. I had real problems with his abortion answer. And not because it wasn't straightforward, it's because it was very straightforward, and I just don't agree with him. And I think I'm pro-life. I look at it's a complicated issue, right? Birth control, abortion as birth control to me is horrendous. But it's also horrendous when red state legislatures get in and start writing legislation so ectopic pregnancies become abortions and miscarriages are tracked. I think impossible for Republican legislatures to write good laws around abortion, but I don't think that we ought to not try. I think the framing of the issue is largely from the left of freedom and reproductive rights and healthcare, and that's the way that it's framed. And that's because we live now in a culture that is predominantly secular, center-left. And the framing is not the way that it was 30, 40 years ago, which is we're taking a human life. What is the most compassionate way to protect the health of the mother, to make this safe, legal, and rare, to use a Bill Clinton phrase? The framing was much more, we acknowledge that this is a human life that we are taking, but there's also these complicated issues of incest and rape and underage rape, obviously, here in Indiana with the story of the 12-year-old girl. And laws and legislations were really written from that framing. Now that is gone. That is not a cultural feature of this discussion, which I just totally disagree with. So I disagree with his answer on it, and I'm struggling not to let it be a deal breaker for me. Because to me, abortion is an issue of the Imago Dei. What you have to understand about my politics is that everything stems from my Christianity. It's why I'm weird, okay? I'm pro-immigrant. I'm pro-freedom of movement and open borders, but I'm also pro-life, right? I don't fit in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party because so many of these issues, I'm on opposite sides from a lot of people on the left and right. And that's because I look at things from the lens of every human is deserving of liberty, dignity, to have their life protected, and we are created in the image of God. And therefore, we have to craft laws that protect life. And that idea is a gift from the Christian church to the Western world, to the world in general. Before the Christianity explosion in the 80,000s, You had the Romans who just viewed human life as expendable. Women were property, people were property. And yes, that was a long march of slavery, but it ended, right? Rape ended. Women have become recognized. A variety of marginalized groups have found greater freedom because the software that we're operating on is the Imago Dei, that every human life has dignity and is deserving of liberty. So that's why murder is wrong, because you were killing an image bearer. That's why rape is wrong. You were harming an image bearer. That's why theft and fraud are wrong. You were defrauding an image bearer. It's why we are different than animals. Animals are property. Pets are property, which we'll get to. They're different than human beings. When it comes to human life, it's a very personal issue for me. We, as I said in a previous episode, we went through 5 miscarriages before we had Matthew. In our first year and a half, I think, of marriage, we had 6 pregnancies. And one of them included holding an 8-week baby in our hands. And I think when you see that up close, it changes your perspective forever. But it also helps me have compassion for those arguments of, I don't know what hospital a woman comes in and they're just letting them die on the table because of ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. Like, I don't know that I totally buy those stories, but it makes me go, I don't want my wife living in a red state. I don't want my wife to die because we are pregnant. So it has shaded the issue and made it a lot more personal for me. The bridge too far for me was saying that he would sign a law from the Democrats forcing every state to be pro-choice. It just is, as a constitutionalist, I think that's just unconscionable and a misunderstanding of your role as a federal government, especially on an issue that is so deeply held in a majority of states. Like, I don't know what's the breakdown of blue and red states, but yeah, I don't know. I also have become a different non-interventionist, or maybe a non-interventionist, through these wars over the last 2 or 3 years. I think one part of my philosophy that has changed a lot is understanding that there really is just evil in the world. There is real evil around us. There are real evil dictators that run other countries. And we have to have a government to protect us from rapists, from people stealing our property, from murderers, from mobs. And that's people burning down Minneapolis and storming the Capitol. I just think as we head into a domestic situation where everybody becomes more extreme, violence, I don't know that it's going up or down. Like, when you look at the large scale aggregate numbers, things aren't changing that much, but I think social media just makes it feel like everything is so much more unhinged now and more dangerous and more violent. I think when you look at culture wars, don't always end in violence and civil wars, but every civil war had a culture war for decades that precipitated the Civil War. So I also look at foreign policy and go, like, I look, how do I put this? I'm still a non-interventionist in that George Bush going into Iraq was completely wrong. Foreign misadventures are totally wrong. Provocations are wrong. I totally disagree with what's happening in Ukraine, where Biden is under the radar, thanks to the pet eating controversy, giving Ukraine the ability to go and use American weapons to attack Russia. Things are happening in Israel and Ukraine that are leading us into major conflicts with major powers. And we couldn't even beat Afghanistan, a minor power. Okay, we're not ready to fight these wars with China, Russia, and Iran. It's just not, we're not ready. I'm all for a strong defense. And I look at things like NATO and go, NATO has helped keep these other countries from being invaded by Russia because Russia is a bad actor. America's power is keeping the island of Taiwan free. The threat of America against China keeps them in balance. Some of that actually is good because it means less people die because we have a strong military and we have strong leadership across the globe. I understand the argument of NATO moving along Russia's borders, but I think a lot of those talking points, when you dig into the history of it, like I've recommended this book so many times, Who Lost Russia, about NATO and the expansion of NATO. Ted Gallatin Carpenter's book from the Cato Institute on NATO is very informative on all the mistakes that NATO made. So is this Who Lost Russia book. There are a lot of reasons that America and their meddling caused Russia to fall into the arms of Putin and to allow it to grow and become a hostile power. So I'm all in favor of that. But making it as simple as adding Estonia or some of these smaller countries like Sweden to NATO is what caused Russia to do it. It robs Russia of its agency. It robs Putin of his agency. Like he's a wild animal that another country gets added to NATO and it's one day closer to starvation for the dog. So once he's let loose, I just don't buy that. I think that is Russian talking points. And I think if we learn anything from Lauren Chen is that we need to be really skeptical about a lot of the information that we're getting from Russia. There is a new podcast from The Atlantic that has autocracy in the title. I'll put the first episode in the show notes, but it talks a lot about how it's two journalists who lived in the Eastern Bloc, and I've read Peter Pomerantz's book on misinformation. It was really good, and they're basically breaking down like how does a country slip into autocracy, and basically outlining the Russian playbook of how they have eroded countries around them through disinformation. Because what happens is SSR just used to invade countries and would take them over and sign pacts. But Russia in the modern era doesn't have that ability. And so in these Eastern Bloc countries, there's a huge information war between the West and the East in Russia. And Russia is now doing a lot of that in the United States. You can say, oh, this is Russian. Oh, Russia. There's a lot of truth to that. Go read the Mueller report. Like, I'm not saying Donald Trump is sold out to the Russians, but in terms of the right, in terms of influence campaigns from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, how many arrests do we have to see in the last month to say, oh, Eric Swalwell, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, all had Chinese agents embedded in their office staffs. And then you also have Lauren Chen and Dave Rubin and Tim Pool taking Russian money. I've long said Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute has a lot of really curious things to say. And I will not be surprised to find out that the guy who wrote the blog The Daily Putin in 2011 is somehow attached to all this. I also thought it was really weird that Angela McArdle, the chair of the LNC, had tweets out after the Tim Pool thing saying, everybody move on. No, what are we talking about? Let's focus on the enemy. Let's stop talking about all this. Thought that was really curious. So my original point is I just think we have to be aware about all of this. Am I for leaving NATO? I don't know. I'm not an automatic yes. And he's an automatic yes. And there's also the element, and I know I'm gonna upset some of my libertarian listeners with all of this, but there's an element of cosplay when you're in the Libertarian Party. Especially if you're the LP candidate. Like the thing about being the top candidate for president, Chase Oliver, Bob Barr, Gary Johnson, they all knew they weren't going to win. Okay? You're the top marketing spot for the party. And as I find myself feeling the stakes, I think when you have kids, it's like true, you really do feel like, man, the stakes are higher for all of this. And one thing that has been pointed out to me by the Pat Down audience is that voting libertarian is privilege. Okay? Now, I know you're rolling your eyes because I roll my eyes too. But they say you live in a red state, so you have the luxury of not having to make the choice of the red or the blue. And I think there is some truth to that, right? There's a luxury in getting to have, it's a luxury to belief to be a libertarian because you're not in the muck and the mire, you're not in the fight. And I felt that way in having that conversation. Not that I am voting for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. There's just no way. I wouldn't ever. But I think it goes back to what I've been talking about on the show and what I truly believe, which is like the urgency of action is increasing. And I'm not saying this is the most important election of our lifetime. I'm saying that if you're a listener, you have to be engaged in some place, and the best place to be socially engaged is in your local community. And I just don't have time to have theoretical discussions about things that are never going to happen. Right? I just have less patience for it. I have less bandwidth for it. I have less time for it. And so that's why I don't know. I walked away partially impressed and partially I just can't do this anymore. Like I feel that way about politics in general. I just can't do this anymore. And I'm not talking about the podcast. I heard somebody put it this way recently, that they don't like talking about politics in the way that most people talk about it because they talk about the weather. And if you look at what I've done the last month, you're interested in the weather. What does he think about the debate? What are they saying about the pets being eaten? Is that true or not? That's the weather. But what's the climate? What's the overall? I just said that like Trump. What's the climate? What's the overall? What are the worldviews that are contributing to the weather? What are the broader arguments? What are the forces that contribute to the discussions? How can we sort all this out? How can we get to a better place? How do I understand my immediate world? Like, how do I relate to people better? How do I have conversations about politics that don't lose relationships? For me, my faith plays a huge role. How can I form a politics that respects the kingdom and be empathetic about it, but also bold and clear and articulate a vision of politics that is not Christian nationalism, right? But also it's just becoming, I think, increasingly harder for people just to feel like, I think listening to that podcast about autocracy really helped put language to something that I've been feeling, which is everything feels so absurd. But the absurdity is the point. We are arguing absurdities on purpose. And this is, I think, one of the geniuses of Donald Trump and his movement, is that they can get us arguing about absurdities so we don't focus on his complete lack of competence, cognition, and vision for this country. And that's not an argument for Harris. I know when you rag on Trump, people inherently hear that you're a Democrat and a liberal, and that's not the case. But if anything, I would like the Republicans to have a nominee that I could vote for. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm more of a Republican than I am a Democrat. And that's probably just going to keep going on the older I get. I think that's just how it goes. But when you look at that debate, you have to really be in the right-wing ecosystem to understand anything Donald Trump was talking about. This is not about the moderators. Okay, the moderators stunk. Okay, they fact-checked him 5 times and her once or twice. Okay, first of all, the media's job is to point out things that are not true. He should just lie less. Right? Secondly, why did he choose ABC to begin with? He has a lawsuit for defamation against ABC right now. He is suing George Stapledopoulos, as he calls him, over saying that he committed rape. So the head of the news division has donated to every Kamala campaign since 2003. Her husband introduced Kamala to her husband. Doug Emhoff. You don't think the Trump campaign knows all that? They just forgot that he's suing them for defamation? Or is that just part of the plan to choose them so if the debate went well, he could go, it's fake, it's all rigged, it's fake news. Don't hold me accountable for being completely incompetent. It's their fault. Like, why would you agree to do a debate with people that you're suing for defamation? If you're suing somebody for defamation, you think that their character is so below, it's so substandard. Why would you choose to enter into an agreement to debate them? It doesn't make any sense to me. Unless you want an out, you want a scapegoat. That's so much of what the Trump campaign, they know they're losing, and Trump is doing things to lose and keeps leaving these little breadcrumbs so he can look back and go, it's the debate moderator's fault. They stole the election from me. It's like, to his incompetence, what was it? 50 some million people watch this thing. Millions and millions more watch the clips. But if you're watching in real time, I think if you're politically interested because you listen to this show, if you were watching it with your spouse or someone who wasn't politically interested, your teenage kids, they probably laughed and looked at you and went, what is he talking about with this dog eating thing? What is he talking about with the trans surgeries for illegal aliens? Like, the pet eating thing was a day or two old. Elon Musk started pushing it on X. So you don't know what he's talking about. And I think Republicans and conservatives get so frustrated because they see for sometimes weeks clips of the dog eating and the cat eating and let's just be real, okay? A lot of Haitians practice voodoo, which involves animal sacrifice, usually chickens. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that when in a town of 80,000 people, where 20 to 30,000 Haitians move in suddenly, they don't change their culture, right? And maybe there is some animal sacrifice happening in the town, and that's how this stuff got started. Or it just could be blatant rumor, and it's all the same type of propaganda that has been used against immigrants since the beginning of time. There's a million articles out there that you can find that show the history of animal sacrifice and they're stealing our pets has been a common trope in American history, being used against immigrants. The Italians, the Irish, everybody. But they see that the town hall conversations, they see the influencer clips, they're primed on this stuff for weeks. So when Donald Trump comes out and says in a debate, they're eating our cats and dogs, the Trump supporters cheer because they go, finally somebody's saying it. They understand the context of what he's saying. But the rest of reality, the other 98% of the country that doesn't live on Twitter, on the right-wing Twitter world, doesn't know what he's talking about. And so they make memes mocking it. The debate moderators go, that's untrue. Which, let me talk about fact-checking for a second. It's annoying. It's usually biased. Nobody looks forward to seeing Daniel Dale or whatever his name is on CNN going, actually, Donald Trump said this. Nobody gives, it's hyperventilate. It's dumb. And the frustrating thing about that fact check and so many of these fact checks is not that the fact checkers give you the context and then say this has been disproven. They usually just go, yeah, this is just untrue, and then move on. I'm not taking your word for it. Like, why would I listen to a mainstream media outlet and just take their word for it? Give me the full context. Say, what he is referencing is a woman in Canton, Ohio, who was eating a cat. It turns out she was not Haitian. She has a drug addiction, and this is a sad story. Haitians, there's no proof that they're eating cats in Springfield, Ohio. Okay, so now you're armed with some information and you're armed with the context of what he's talking about. But that's not what these fact checks always do. They just go, mostly false. Like, it's just this smug, superior thing. It just drives me crazy. I know it's because I've spent my life nurtured on talk radio and media bias, is so inherent in all of us who were. But that also is on Trump. Trump is so incapable of making the case and giving the context around these little things. He's just like a guy who listens to podcasts and picks up a fact and goes, I heard, I can't really tell you where, but I was listening to this podcast and they said that blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, that's not really like a reliable piece of information. Maybe I can go look it up. Like, this is the Alex Jones effect, right? If you listen to Alex Jones, it's 50% promotion, 25% total nonsense, and then 25% of stuff that is true if you go and really look into the source, but he got it a little wrong, right? And that's Donald Trump. He says these things that he heard that are true and doesn't give any context. And so he leaves himself open to being mocked with a million hilarious memes because he's incompetent. He can't give the context. He's not a good communicator. A good communicator would stand up there and go, actually, here's what's happening. I feel your pain. Bill Clinton would stand there and give you the context and say, this is why we have to have controls or limits or do something. The people of Springfield, Ohio are having their service. There's a PBS NewsHour piece. You can go look it up on Twitter where they went into the town and found out what's happening with the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. There's a few factories there who needed workers because American workers were not applying and they needed to bring in help. So they brought in a lot of Haitians. According to the people who run the factories, fabulous workers and great people and awesome to work with. But you also have in the town, the schools are having language barrier issues. Local healthcare, fire, police are all stressed. You have, I think it's just natural. I lived in a town called Southport, which is where the apartment that I lived in when I was doing the show was in Southport, and it was in the center of the second largest population of Burmese outside of Burma called the Chin, who were refugees. And they, over the 15 years I lived in Southport, completely changed the face of the area. For the better, by the way. But the Marsh grocery store went from a Marsh to a Vietnamese grocery store. There's 25 Chin groceries because every little pocket has their own dietary and culinary desires, and somebody starts a grocery to feed their particular local tribe, I don't know what the term is, culinary tastes. And they're also community centers, basically. You'd go to the library or you go to the CVS and you'd have regular interaction with Chin people who were all sweet. And all the apartments, especially the cheaper ones, became Chin. I mean, you could do an article like Aurora, Colorado, that Burmese gangs have taken over this apartment complex at Stop 11 in Madison. No, just a lot of Chin immigrated there because the United States is generous and awesome and brings in people who are being killed because they're Christians, because the Buddhists, weirdly, are killing the Chin Christians in Burma. And you know what? They changed the area for the better. The white trash moved out and the area got a lot cleaner. But there were, more traffic accidents, or you'd be in the grocery store and they'd ask for the fresh idea card and the cashier would be frustrated because she's had this conversation 10 times and I go, look, you just scan this thing and, oh, okay. Or the Bed Bath & Beyond, people would come in with coupons because they thought they were getting a free pillow, and that's not how it works. There's not tension, but it isn't. I think so many people want frictionless, free. That's why people move to the suburbs, right? They don't want friction. But I'll tell you, I'd rather live in Southport than Marion, Indiana, where these industrial towns lost all of their population over 50 years, and now it's fentanyl dens, right? And the Haitians are going to move in and over the next 50 years keep Springfield, Ohio from becoming Marion, Indiana. Southport is a thriving part of Indianapolis now because of it. And they're not inherently Democrats. Like, this notion is left over from the Tammany Hall era, where Tammany Hall, Boss Tweed would go down to the boats when the Irish were getting off and help them get housing and food, and would say, come vote for us. And so Republicans in New York would go, hey, these Democrats are doing the wrong thing. And that has persisted through the party over the last 100 years as a myth. But then in the same breath, the Republicans would be like, awesome, we're getting more Latinos to vote for us. Right? Because the second generation of Latinos, or even the first generation of Latinos who are entrepreneurial, who are pro-family, who are pro-life, Catholic, conservative-leaning people, look at the Republican Party as a better alternative. So it's just not a given that every immigrant is a Democrat. And I think if the Republicans stepped up, Democrats look at it and go, let me give you some services, right? Like in California, I was talking to somebody who immigrated from Nicaragua recently. And he said, why are there no services here? If you're in California, you have housing and everybody helps you. But here in Indianapolis, there's nobody helping you. I don't know. You just come here and you're like, you need family and community at the local grocery store to help you get connected. What if this red state actually gave a crap about the immigrants, the Afghan translators that moved to Indiana, the Chin? I'll tell you, the Chin have been greatly benefited by the churches on the South Side. The churches on the South Side, who are largely white suburbanite Republicans, stepped up and said, we're going to donate our furniture, our clothes. We're going to do all these things to help you get acclimated to society here, because these people get off the planes from Burma with nothing but the clothes off their back. So what if Republicans around the country took that attitude, extended the love of Christ to help them get acclimated to the community, instead of spreading all these viral videos from people in Columbus? Like the guy carrying the goose in Columbus, turns out that guy was frustrated that his local services were not picking up roadkill, and he took matters into his own hands. A completely libertarian viewpoint. Your local government has failed, do it yourself. Care for your community. But instead, libertarians are going, oh, look at this Haitian. Every black person is now a Haitian. It's just, you don't see the racism in that, and then you wonder why black people don't vote for you? You don't take 5 seconds to figure out if this is true or not before sharing it? Maybe go help that guy pick up the roadkill. But I just think MAGA has the same view as progressive Democrats. Every problem has a federal government solution. Whereas the libertarian view is that every problem has a voluntary solution, and we have to be the ones to fix it. So Republicans just don't get my vote, even though I agree with them on a lot of stuff, because they look at federal solutions. Donald Trump is a big government progressive candidate. So to wrap that up, he can't make these cases. He can't parse the information in a correct way and leaves himself vulnerable to being mocked. And if they had a candidate like Ron DeSantis, he'd be up by 10 points because he'd be killing her. I know the media would hate Ron DeSantis and they'd call him the devil, and the Democrats would do what they would do, regardless of putting up Larry Hogan, who's a squishy Republican. They'd call him Hitler too, right? It doesn't matter. That's always going to happen. Republicans crying about media bias. It's like, where have you been? Remember Binders Full of Women? This is just baked into the cake. If you're a Republican, if you're a libertarian, you can expect to get killed by the media and the left-wing media apparatus for being a fascist and horrible and awful, and you hate old people and you want to kill everyone. It is what it is. And I have a real problem with the cognitive dissonance of the Trump movement saying this man is so strong. He's a strong man who can take on these dictators around the world. He is the toughest man who can survive a bullet. His ethos is just one of invincibility. But they were also really mean to me at the debate, and ABC News fact-checked me and told me I was wrong 5 times. Like, you don't see how that completely undermines your message of you being Mr. Tough Guy? So it's the absurdity of it all. It's the whipping me back and forth. It's just, talk about policy. Talk about how you're going to make my family not struggle at the grocery. He walked into every trap. She showed her skill as a prosecutor. Those muscles came out because she did what a prosecutor does, which gets you on the stand, gets you disoriented, gets you trying to defend yourself. And in the process of babbling to defend yourself, saying stupid things that get you convicted or make you lose a debate. She kicked his ass. And he has no one to blame but himself because he's so undisciplined. He's so easily provoked because of his narcissism. And when you look at Nate Silver, pollster guy, tweeted something out, I think yesterday, Trump has made 5 big mistakes. I'm going to try to remember the mistakes. I don't have my computer in front of me. Picking J.D. Vance, who has been awful, and every week says something stupid that doesn't help them. The long rambling speech at the convention, because if you remember that, it felt like Trump was totally invincible that week. Trump gets shot. He goes into the convention. They have a really good convention. And then he speaks, and you're mesmerized for 15, 20 minutes as he tells the story. Because you're waiting to hear something. I'm going to tell you now, one time, and I'll never talk about it again. And it totally lacked any emotion of how he felt in that moment. He just recounted the facts. It's why people hate history class, because you sit there and they tell you, then Waterloo happened, and then Napoleon was exiled to this island, and then came the Third Republic of France. And okay, but tell me about the emotions that everybody was feeling in that moment that will make me actually internalize and identify with these characters. That's what makes good history, right? He didn't do that. And then he went off on a tangent. He's like, I got a good crowd here. I'm going to go off teleprompter. And gave the longest acceptance speech in history at a party convention. The speeches in the 1800s used to last hours, and he beat them. And it was boring, and it was the same old nonsense. That's why I wasn't blown away by Harris, because I never learned anything about Kamala Harris in that debate. What you learned was how much Donald Trump sucks. Most people already know that, and they tuned in hearing to see if they could learn anything about Kamala Harris. So it wasn't a total victory for her, because all these focus groups that, I don't know why we put so much stock into these things. What idiot is in September going, I just don't know who to vote for. I just can't decide. Is it Trump or Kamala Harris? Like, you haven't made up your mind yet? I haven't. I've made up my mind that I'm not going to vote. I may get in there and go, okay, I'll vote for Chase. But maybe I won't, right? I'm undecided there if I want to be pragmatic and register myself as a third-party vote with somebody that I agree 60% of the time with. Or do I want to just not vote and then vote for Rainwater and every other libertarian to make a statement that to the Libertarian Party that you chose a bad candidate that doesn't align with my values? I'm still debating that choice, right? But like, you're undecided on Trump versus Kamala, who is exactly the same as Joe Biden, when there's a million different ways to read and research those two? I don't know. That just blows me away. But yeah, so anyways, back to Trump's 5 mistakes. Picking Vance, the really bad speech that failed to capitalize on the moment. What was the others? This debate where he failed to do, I just don't know what he was doing. He's surrounded himself with people who tell him he's super awesome and that everything he does is awesome. And he just keeps doing that. And then can't believe that he lost because everybody tells him I saw this with libertarian candidates all the time when I ran the party. I call them the day after the election and they're like, I can't believe I got 3%. Everybody I talked to told me that I was winning, that they were going to vote for me. Literally everybody I never talked to one person who didn't say they were voting. yeah, they lied to you. Right? And there's also a lot more people in your district than the people that you talk to. So it's a straight ticket. Like, it's just really easy to fool yourself when you run for office. So I don't know. Trump is doing everything wrong, making all the wrong choices. And I think it's important to point these things out and talk about it now. So when he claims that this was all rigged and we get into the confusion of the period between the election and the certification of the election in January, it's going to be a long, very difficult, very confusing few months, because they're going to sow as much confusion and disinformation as possible in order to get his electors in there and try to do what they did last time. This time he's not doing it from a position of president, so it will be a lot harder, but it's going to be just as confusing and awful as it was last time. And remember, we were doing episodes around this time back in 2020 saying this is what he's going to do. The Bart Gellman episodes, and like we outlined, Donald Trump is doing these things to have this result if he loses as a self-protection mechanism. And everybody just forgets all that stuff. But I think it's really important that we talk about Donald Trump's little signposts along the way that he can point back to, and remember that he is a human being and a politician, and he is subject to the same rules of gravity as everyone else. And if he loses, it's because he lost and he did things that didn't help him win, and not because the media screwed him over or election machines were rigged and all this junk that's just not true, right? I think, I don't know if you feel it, but I feel like people in the public there's a lot of excitement for Harris. I think she's up 5 points since the debate. Why? I think the impression of Harris that so many of us have had who live in a right-wing ecosystem is we just see the clips of her being bumbling and coconut trees and not a serious person, not a competent person. She's afraid to give interviews, afraid to debate. She's afraid to go off script. And if you watch it, the assignment, Harris has to show up, not laugh at inappropriate times, look competent, do something that we have not seen in a decade, thanks to Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which is just put together sentences about what you believe and what you're going to do, emotionally connect with people, basic cognition. On her abortion answer, I think most people watch these debates for 20, 30 minutes and then tune it out. So I think the biggest scandal for the ABC thing is bringing up abortion second. They have to do economy first, but then bringing up abortion second, which is her best, strongest subject in the early part of the debate. And she really connected on that. He starts talking about they're going to kill. This is, again, who knows about what's the governor's name of Virginia that said that? He was on a radio show, and before Youngkin, he said, with this legislation, we're going to take the baby out, set it on a table, and then the mother and doctor will decide what to do with it. And it was a horrific thing to say, and he has earned the scorn and ire. But do I think babies across the country are being killed after they're born? I do not. Partial late-term abortions, when they happen, are usually to save the life of the mother. Right? So it's not like Kamala Harris is running around going, eat the babies, kill the babies, sacrifice them, which is really what he's trying to get at. Excuse me. He I think, answered first and just says all this stuff that nobody knows what he's talking about unless you're super in the weeds. Looks bizarre and weird. And then she comes in and goes, look, it's about your wife not dying when she's pregnant. It's about your choice to not have an old white man control your body. And I understand your fear and pain around this subject. And I understand blah, blah, blah. And she emotionally connected with people. Okay, that's when I was like, he's done for. Because she understood the assignment. She executed the assignment. And she emotionally connected with people. And she didn't do anything that was like gaffy. There wasn't any like moment that you could point to with Kamala Harris and go, well, that was like a weird thing, or she really got this super wrong, except for saying they keep saying there's no active duty military. Like, I personally know somebody that is in an active theater right now. Like, that's just a blatant lie. Yes, you can go back and fact check her, and there were things that she said that were wrong. But in terms of Joe Biden having a mid-sentence stop, and she just executed. And so I think people went and looked at her and went, all right, she's not drooling. Maybe she could actually wake up in the morning at a reasonable hour and work past 4. And she's probably not going to tweet every day things that we're going to talk about, like pet eating. I think the debate really helped her because she cleared a very low bar. Right? The expectations for her were real low. And she exceeded those very low expectations by giving an absolute... I keep saying this. She's the Vinny Testaverde of presidential candidates. She is a journeyman politician who... She's not Curtis Painter, right? Peyton Manning goes out and Curtis Painter comes in and just throws a lot of interceptions and just completely screws it up. She's Dan Orlovsky. Peyton is out. Dan Orlovsky comes in. Perfectly fine. You win a couple games. You lose to the tough opponents. But no major errors. Just gets it done. She's not Barack Obama, or I'd even argue George Bush was a generational president, and you just look at the sheer amount of things right and wrong that he achieved. We're 23 years out from 9/11, and you still can emotionally connect with, soon he'll hear from all of us, right? Like 9/11, for those of us who are alive, emotionally bonded us to George Bush, I think, in a way that it's hard to explain. I don't know that Kamala Harris, or really any president, will ever have that ability in the internet era, the way that I think Barack Obama was the last one who had that chance. No, Donald Trump emotionally connects to a lot of his people. Maybe not on a large scale, but there was never a moment when Trump or Biden was president where I was watching them where I went, man, I feel proud to be an American and we're all in this together. So, yeah, I should wrap this up. I don't know. Just remember, Donald Trump does make mistakes. It's not other people's fault. Kamala Harris is perfectly average, but the expectations are really low. Just try to fact check yourself, like Google stuff before you share it. I'm totally open to the fact that maybe there's some animals missing in Springfield, Ohio, but what do I care, right? I think this is an important tool that you need to have. When a news story comes up that is completely unimportant, like cats and geese being eaten in Springfield, Ohio, who cares? Let's say all 20,000 Haitians are going to the park and they're each picking out a Canadian goose to kill and eat for dinner that night. I don't care. I'm pro killing Canadian geese. I want them all dead. Let's import more Haitians and put them around every retention pond in America, if that's what every Haitian is going to do. Okay, let's just assume your premise, the racist premise, that every Haitian is just a wild savage running around eating Canadian geese. I don't believe that, right? I'm saying that's the framing that is coming from this. Let's say that's absolutely true and then some. So what? Cool. The Robinsons have made millions of dollars on Duck Dynasty from killing ducks. The libertarian position on eating pets is that pets are property. They are not built in the image of God. They possess no special spiritual qualities. Yes, you love them, and yes, they're important to our lives, but they are property. And you cannot come on my property and steal my cat and then take it and eat it for dinner. But let's say you live in an apartment complex like I lived in, and I have 2 cats that live in my house that were born under my stairs. I took them with me when we moved to this house. They were owned by no one. They were property of the community. They were feral cats. No one owned these cats, so I homesteaded 2 of them. If I had taken those 2 cats that were owned by no one and eaten them, I have every right to do that by homesteading them into my oven. Okay, that's the libertarian position. Enjoy. Just don't defraud or steal anyone's property. Okay? We're going to take the premise of the story and say this is all true. Who cares? I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. And if the people next door to me were eating my cats, then I have a problem and we have a problem. But if it's in Springfield, Ohio, that's for the people of Springfield, Ohio to deal with. And their local law enforcement to deal with property theft of property. I don't care about Springfield, Ohio. I don't live there. I've got enough to worry about in my own house, inside my own head, and inside my own neighborhood. I just don't have the bandwidth to care about 3 cats in a town 600 miles away from me being eaten. I just don't. And you shouldn't either, right? There just has to become a limit to the nonsense that you are worried about. I absolve you from caring about pets being eaten in Springfield, Ohio. All right. Thanks for joining us here on the program. I really do enjoy doing this. I love talking to you all. Please leave a comment on the Patreon or Substack thread. You're listening to this in the public feed. We're doing this more often over in the Patreon feed, where I'm doing these types of shows. I was really busy this week. I just didn't get to it in the frequency that I like. I apologize to my patrons for that. But if you knew my schedule, it's just been crazy. So get back to it a little more next week. But tons of bonus content over there for you to listen to. 2 weeks ago, I think I put 1 episode in the free feed and had 3 or 4 shows in the Patreon feed. Lots of content for you to check out. Plus, you get to support the show. You get to support the Spangle family, the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.